Is another factor which is very, very germane to human existence. There are crises everywhere. There are crises everywhere, from home to the community and to the larger society, even to nations of the world. But how are they been able to manage the crisis? What are the factors responsible for crisis management? Failure to manage it? Where does it lead to? And that is a subject of discussion on your unit, collective bargaining crisis and the image of stakeholders. I have stakeholders in the studio with me from the professional aspect and, of course, in the union per se. And I have in the studio with me Mr. Larry Lady, the PR expert and faith of me on this show. You are welcome.
My pleasure.
I also have another unionist in the house with me. He's the chairman of the Academic Staff Union of Universities, FUNAP branch, chapter, I beg your pardon, and that's a comrade Dr. Adebayo Oni. It is my pleasure to have you on your image, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate you for the invitation.
Now, let me start from the public relations perspective. In public relations, crisis management is one of the adjunct areas of public relations practice. And to start from there, what is crisis management in public relations? Mr. Larry Remy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. In public relations, crisis management is a function of PR executive or practitioners, in the sense that we are very sensitive to the image of the organization we represent. And therefore, as much as possible, we normally try to keep a tab on what will affect the image of the organization when in times of crisis. Because like you said in your opening address, crisis is a situation where the stakeholders decide to stick to their guns, to stick to their position during collective bargaining process in organizations. And when they do that, without doing a situation analysis of what has brought them to the bargaining table, then you find out that there was going to be crisis. There are various forms of crisis. We have domestic crisis, we have corporate crisis, we have political crisis, you have force majeure crisis, like the COVID-19 pandemic we're having now. We're in a crisis situation. And when you, as a PR person, in any organization, you need to do a situation analysis and find out, why are we in a crisis situation? What are the necessary things we need to put in place to manage the crisis? Like the COVID-19 issue, you find out that it's something that overnight was foisted on mankind, and it has gone beyond even the control of even advanced countries like the United States of America, the UK, and what have you. But then, from the public relation perspective, a crisis manager should be able to have a crisis management plan to guide when in time of crisis. And when crisis come, remember, it starts usually, most crises start from a conflict. But because I said there are types of crises,
Yes.
The COVID-19 issue we're discussing as a crisis, a global crisis, did not warn anybody before it came. And so, what will be the position of a PR person, either at the corporate level or a political level, is to quickly do situation analysis and see how they can combat and manage the situation in such a way that at the end of the day, we'll be able to bring succor to the stakeholders that are affected.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Remy has been able to at least lay a good foundation as far as the crisis is concerned. He has mentioned different types of crises that we have and you, of course, tailor this towards a public relations practice. And let me go back to Dr. Onidi as chairman of FUNAB. We are talking about collective bargaining crisis. Let me ask, why do we have crisis when it comes to collective bargaining as a trade unionist?
Thank you. From the perspective of the trade union, collective bargaining itself is a process that leads to some form of legal and lawful engagement between the employer on one hand and the employees. Now, in this case now, the employer, at least as an employer of labor, the employee, in this case, may be represented in that bargaining process by the trade union that is on ground. So more often than not, you expect that going to a collective bargaining table means that as a trade union, you have you have your own charter of demands, and the charter of demands basically has to do with issues that has to do with the welfare of your members. And so, from the perspective of the trade union, the trade union goes to a collective bargaining table to protect the interests of its members and seek the welfare, improved welfare of its members.
Can't you protect their interest and their welfare without any crisis? Can't it be ideological, if I may ask you?
Yes, you see, the reason why crisis trade collective bargaining is a situation whereby there is successful, bargaining process. Agreements were reached, and one of the party decide not to honor the agreement. Most times, it comes from the employer angle. And in a situation whereby the employer does not, respect the agreement is freely entered with his employees or their representative in form of the union, then definitely, just like the PR man has said, the crisis will come because a gap has been created. A gap in terms of either understanding, either communication, or ability to be able to sit down together and fashion a way forward. So, crisis comes when the employer decides not to honor the terms and the letters of agreement reached in the process of collective bargaining.
And now let me go back to Mr. Lanrim as a PR person. Now we have stakeholders who should probably guide against crisis when there are issues on ground, especially when it comes to welfare of the people, welfare of probably members of staff of a particular organization or trade union at large. What should be the roles of stakeholders when it comes to bargaining, collective bargaining?
Thank you very much. I think the position of the role of trade unions vis-a-vis what should be their role is prima facie a primary function of all labor unions, whether in the academia, whether in corporate environments or in corporate environments. Like he said, it should be to protect the interests of their members. And one fundamental interest is to ensure that during collective bargaining, no employee loses his or her job. Secondly, is to ensure that they come out the better than they were before. Look at what has been going on with ASU and the federal government, for example.
Yes, I was coming back.
Yes. You see that right from 2009, an agreement was signed, mutually agreed upon, between these stakeholders, I mean the labor unions and the employers, only for one party to renege on the implementation of the agreement reached by both parties. At the end of the day, that has dragged from 2009 till 2020. Look at the spate of time. So, one of the critical stakeholders in collective bargaining when it is happening is, of course, the labor unions representing their constituency, that is the workers, the workforce. And most of the time, I have issues with labor union when it comes to collective bargaining.
How? In what sense?
Yeah, because I feel they are not proactive enough. Proactive in the sense that it is not when the weather becomes too murky before you now come up with agitations. What I'm trying to say here, though the labor unions in Nigeria, I give it to them, they are doing their best, given the circumstances where they work, where they ply their trade, whether in corporate or even in corporate organizations, even the Yalatas and the Yalejas,
the petty traders.
They have their own unions.
But let me ask you this question. You have given kudos to the labor unions, but let me make
well, let me just quickly wrap up what I'm trying to say, that they are not proactive enough.
Okay.
When I was in the service in those days, you will see ASU coming out to start agitating for a cause. Then SANU and NASU and other labor unions in the academia will keep mum. They will not talk until ASU has felled the elephant. You not see them brandishing their own knife. They want to.
You mean one union is more powerful than the other? Is that what you are trying to establish?
What I'm trying to say that one union, where ASU has always been the one championing the cause of the academia, but in most cases, the lecturers. Whereas SANU is for the non-teaching.
Okay.
And NASU is for the technical people. Okay. Now, when you look at the scenario that is happening, NASU will not join ASU. Neither will the other SANU will not join ASU. Okay. Oh. But with the moment ASU seems to have gotten a leeway out, you see them to declaring the trade dispute. But I feel that that is not supposed to be what it should be.
That should be a collective.
That should be. We say it's a collective bargaining process. Why can't all the labor unions shit their ego thing and come to a round table and say, look, we are in the same environment. We go to the same market. Let's fight this common enemy. And then at the end of the day, we'll come back home, we'll all smile. That's why I said they're not proactive, collective. And ASU has that leadership role among the labor forces.
Maybe because the ASU chairman is there.
No, not because of that. What I'm saying that is when you look at establishment position in tertiary institution, you will give it, for example, if you are crossing from SANU, I mean, as a SANU member, you want to become a lecturer, they will ask you to drop to one level, which means we are trying to say that the position of those on the teaching cadre is superior to those of...
That's your opinion?
No, that is the way it is practiced, not
all right.
So, as a result of that, you discover that what we are saying is that the big brother ASU should be able to collectively
work hand in hand with other unions.
With other unions, and that is what the employer, federal government, is leveraging on to make sure they deal with the demand of labor union in the academic environment.
Okay, before I throw my question at Dr. Oni, you can be part of the discussion by calling on the phone number that will be displayed on your television screen, Collective Bargaining Crisis, and the image of the stakeholders on your image. You can also watch us live on DSTV, 260, GoTV, and of course on Star Time, and make your contributions known. Dr. Onina, you mentioned something about ASU, or let me say unions in tertiary institutions. For close to 8 months now, students have been home. ASU has been on strike. And people have, of course, oftentimes, they have been castigating ASU for holding children to ransom, I mean, university students. What is your opinion about this? Is ASU not asking for too much? Like he said, is there a good relationship between your union and other unions? Because we are talking about collective bargaining. What's your opinion about this?
Well, thank you. Let me first say that, like I mentioned the other time, the primary role of unions, or trade union, is to seek the welfare of its members and protect the interests of its members within an organization. Very quickly, I will say that the issue that crystallized into the current crisis in the university system, like we have said, stemmed from an agreement freely signed by the federal government with our union in the process of collective bargaining. ASU has continued to be using the procedure of collective bargaining because it's an established process recognized by the International Labour Organization, especially when it comes to the relationship between employer and employee. Issues relating to condition of service, wages, salaries, and others. But very clearly, you see, the interest of each union, even though all the unions are within the same university system, the truth of the matter is that the objectives, these interests are not the same. So that oftentimes creates gaps between the unions that we have in the university system. The approach and the method of also seeking or pursuing redress or justice for their members are not also the same. And so, just like you say, he said, while ASU continue to pursue issues through the process of engagement, continuous engagement, other unions, you know, appears to be what? they just very cold about it. And it is when the matter is almost achieved, that is when you now start and say, oh, we are also not. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Even though, yes, government may be capitalizing on some of those things, and that is the more reason
on the division among the unions.
That is the more reason why the crisis continue to be more complex, even in the hands of government. You also recall that it is not only in the educational sector. If you go to the medical sector, you will see that kind of, you know, polarization between the medical doctors and the other, the nurses and all those things. So what we are trying to say is the fact that the objective of each of those unions are not the same. The approach for pursuing the interest and welfare of their members within the system are also not the same. So the process of engagement are also not the same. So at the same time, you cannot expect that they would also continue to achieve the same results. So the point we are making is the fact that ASU has always continued to say, just like, yes, you can go to government, go and stoop low, they throw something to you, but ASU will say whatever you want to get must be achieved through the process of collective bargaining. Because if you are given anything, that same way, it could be taken away from you. And that is why our union had continued to be insisting that government should sit on the table, on the negotiation table. Everybody will come. Yes, on the process of collective bargaining, all stakeholders are the same. Both the government and you know, the employee. It is assumed that both parties are the same. And so you come with your charter of demands, and by the time you have an agreement, that agreement it's not foisted on you. The agreement we are talking about in 2009 was not signed under duress. We didn't have any evidence that they were forced to sign it. So you have no reason not to honor that agreement. But if for any reason, just like he had mentioned, there are economic situations or developments that warrants that you take a second look at the agreement we signed with a trade union for reasons just like it's talking about pandemic, and you know the country without knowing goes into recession. I think the process is also has to do with what? With engagement. Can we sit down and take a second look at this agreement? But more often than not, you discover that the government attitude is to always, even when there was no recession, even when there was no reason to repudiate the agreement, they just deliberately feel that let us just keep them talking, keep them talking style, and that has always been some of the sources of disagreements that usually crystallize.
Thank you very much. From his submission, he said the government loves to see people, unionists per se, let them continue to talk, let them continue to shout, let them continue to agitate. Why does government have to wait for crisis before they could act? Number one. Number two, why do they wait for, they said the only language government understands is strike. And this has, of course, impact, very serious impact, negative impact on the people and the society at large. So why does government wait for this before they could act appropriately?
Thank you very much. People deserve the kind of government they have. In the third world countries, the governments are not always being sincere with the way they relate with labor unions. They look for loopholes here and there and leverage on where the loopholes are. And one of the critical loopholes is the one I referred to earlier, that among the labor unions in the academia, they find out that there is this ego issue, infighting, superiority complex.
Is it caused by government?
No, it's not caused by government, I agree with you. What I say is it's a human factor. Which I'm saying that ASU, by way of establishment position, being a leading stakeholder in the academia, should also be able to speak the same language that will augur well for the other labor unions on campus. We are using ASU as a case study here because they are still on strike. We find it in all other labor unions too, in the manufacturing sector, in textile, in everything. In fact, if you look at the extractive industries, like in the petroleum, Pengason, Nupeng, you know, when those ones cough, the government will start shivering because they know that that is the golden egg. I mean, that is the goose that lays the golden egg.
We'll continue that conversation next week. What is your take home on this because we're going to continue next week?
Okay, my take here is I want, all the various stakeholders in the academia and in all other labor, they should be proactive and should be able to do a situation analysis before they go to the round table to engage their employers. When they do this, then when you go to a round table, you should be ready to shift ground based on facts and figures.
We agree with him. Shift grounds, as far as that's concerned. 1 minute.
Well, I would agree on the basis of the fact that the process of collective bargaining itself has to do with a question of give and take. But of course, there should be empirical facts and evidence. For example, if government is saying there was no fund, and in the course of where there's pandemic and the economy is bad, and within that context, you are buying postcards for National Assembly members. I do not think that there's, just like we said, part of the crisis is the element of insincerity.
We'll go contemporary when we come next week, God willing. This is how where we draw the curtains of this week's edition of Your Image, Collective Bargaining Crisis and the Image of Stakeholder on Your Image. Until we meet next week, let me thank Mr. Lanre Remy, PR expert. Thank you very much. He's also a member of the Nigerian Subpopulations of the State Chapter, and Dr. Comrade Adebayo Oni, the chairman of the Academic Staff Union of Universities, Funab branch. Thank you very much for being part of the conversation. I'm sure you'll join us next week to continue with this topic. Until we meet next week to, of course, short a new course for crisis management in Nigeria as far as collective bargaining is concerned. Let us be crisis-free. Let's love our society. Let's move Nigeria forward. See you next week.